Pema Chodron is a wonderful Buddhist teacher whose books I highly recommend to you. Probably there's YouTube and podcasts and so forth out there with her as well. This is from one of her classics, When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times. Impermanence is the goodness of reality. Just as the four seasons are in continual flux, winter changing to spring to summer to autumn, just as day becomes night, light becoming dark, becoming light again, in the same way, everything is constantly evolving. Impermanence is the essence of everything. It is babies becoming children, then teenagers, then adults, then old people, and somewhere along the way, dropping dead. Impermanence is meeting and parting. It's falling in love and falling out of love. Impermanence is bittersweet, like buying a new shirt and years later finding it as part of a patchwork quilt. People have no respect for impermanence. We take no delight in it. We despair of it. We regard it as pain. We try to resist it by making things that will last forever, we say. Things that we don't have to wash, things that we don't have to iron. Somehow, in the process of trying to deny that things are always changing, we lose our sense of the sacredness of life. We tend to forget that we are part of the natural scheme of things. Here ends the reading. There's a scene you might remember early in the film Saving Private Ryan, when Margaret Ryan, who's the mother of 4 boys who are off fighting in World War II, is seen in her farmhouse doing dishes in the kitchen, and she's kind of looking out the window because she hears a noise, and then you see her eyes get tense and focus because she sees a black car coming down the driveway. And with an expression part terror and part stoic calm, she walks to the door and opens it and goes out onto the porch to meet the men, an army officer and a chaplain who have just gotten out of the car, which has a military emblem on the side, and whose terrible errand of notification of death they all know is coming. And she has so much dignity, but her ankles kind of wobble, and she simply collapses on the porch. And the men, not at all surprised, just go to her and bend down to speak to her where she is. And there's no dialogue in the scene. There doesn't need to be. And what we learn, of course, that sets off all of the action and is based on a true story is that she has lost 3 of her sons in combat, and they are going to go and find the 4th to bring him home to her. Life is like that. I'm sorry to say that life is like that, and we have just experienced as a community a shock of notification of death, just like that. We share news about loss and sorrow all the time. That's the beauty of community, to share what is going on among us. We do this ritually in the part of the liturgy we call Joys and Sorrows every week. We care, we listen, we make calls, we reach out to each other, and we're gathered to get through life together. What was that wonderful Prince lyric, when he started that song? Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to get through this thing called life, right? And then occasionally, and we pray to be spared it, there is especially grievous news, the moment you're really not prepared for, the kind we got just about 10 days ago when we learned about the death of John Benson, his nephew Andrew Carruth, and his sister-in-law Young Benson, of carbon monoxide poisoning. Ann Principe texted me, and Gloria Kozlowski emailed me, and others soon followed. Misha texted, and I immediately, here's what happened for me, I immediately rejected the news as being impossible. I didn't say it, I didn't say, no way, but my body rejected the reality in that I felt totally calm and reassured. That's not John. It just isn't. It's not that family. And that's sometimes what the body will do. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who developed the idea of stages of grief, identifies denial as one of the first stages. So I called the Nahant Police Department, and when the lieutenant said he couldn't verify or deny because he said they were still notifying next of kin, and only then, when he took my number, did my brain begin to absorb the possibility, the reality. It was John's address. It was John. But he was just here. He was right there. He was right here. Right here. He was just here. And at the program, and in the meeting for the church history ministry team, and planning to lead another bird watch, and in the kitchen, every Sunday, bustling around cleaning, always keeping an eye on what needed to be done and just doing it. The last time I saw John was December 31st in the morning when we did a labyrinth meditation instead of a traditional service in here. We did it in the parish hall. And we had guests from the Marblehead Unitarian Universalist congregation who had no worship service at their church that morning. So we said, come on over and join us. And a group of them and a group of our folks were having a lively chat in the skylight room after doing the meditation. And people had coffee in their hands and hot chocolate. And at about 11:25 or so, John walked into the skylight room carrying this big baggie, this big Ziploc bag of cookies that somebody had dropped off. And he stood kind of in the middle of the crowd, and he shook this big Ziploc bag of cookies and said, does anyone want a cookie? And I kind of zoomed up to him and I said, John, how about a plate? And he went, oh, yes. And he went off to get a plate. And that was just so like him. We all share this hollow-stomached feeling of not having been able to say goodbye to him, not having been able to tell him how much he meant to us, how treasured he was and is. But we can still tell him, like I'm telling him right now. We have video clips of John taken over the years as an earnest Pharaoh, I think he was, in Children of Eden, which was a musical that everyone did years ago. And most recently, this past Christmas Eve, when he was a reader. He was such a good reader. And he began just standing right over here reading the gospel passage that Linda Jones had already read like a minute before. And I realized, oh my goodness, this is happening. And so I had to stop him, and I stopped him with the same phrase the angels used, which is, John, be not afraid. But we just heard that reading. There's that Madeleine L'Engle poem. And he was absolutely unfazed. You see it on the video, even though he's not holding the microphone anymore, so you can't actually hear what he says, but you can see as he just charmingly segues into the poem by Madeleine L'Engle, that he's just fine with it. And this poem that's called this, I forget what it's called, but it ends with these words. It's about Jesus, of course. And it ends, "We cannot wait till the world is sane to raise our songs with joyful voice. For to share our grief, to touch our pain, he came with love. Rejoice, rejoice." And so that was the last word that John ever spoke from up here to us. Rejoice. We will remember him with so much fondness. I hope we will find ways to honor his ethic of hospitality and generous sharing of gifts. I don't know who else I can send my recordings of birdsong to receive an accurate identification of the bird and more information than I could ever absorb about its migratory patterns, dietary preferences, habitats, plumage, and anything else you could ever wish to know. The world shifts. Your personal universe changes. Sometimes it's a punch to the gut. Sometimes it's a cracking open of the heart, such as when you hold your child or grandchild in your arms for the first time. Something happens in those moments. Before we begin to adjust our minds to accommodate the new reality, to fit it into the pattern of what we know or understand, or think we know and understand, in that space between the shock of change and the making sense of it, there is a sacred territory where a veil is lifted, or perhaps a veil is lowered. I'm not sure, and I've never been sure. But let me say that again. When sudden and dramatic change occurs, a veil seems to be lifted somehow, or perhaps lowered, and the nature of reality either revealed or obscured. I believe that it is in this spiritual territory that we have reached the bounds of understanding, the boundaries of understanding, and we stand on the verge of divine wisdom that is actually beyond our mortal capacity to absorb. But you can feel the veil around you. It has a presence that I have experienced and I have heard many of you describe in many ways. You'll say it was an eeriness. I felt like it was cobwebby, or I felt like it was sort of a cloudy environment, misty. You'll talk about spirit, holiness. It is so important after these moments to respect that they have an enormous impact on us. The brain is absorbing profound matters, but also protecting us by going into shock. The soul comes out from the deep and can make us feel kind of haunted, or people have described it as a sensation of someone or something constantly watching us or accompanying us, which can feel very comforting or kind of uncomfortable. When I have spoken to you in past days, I have been asking very sort of basic questions like, are you eating? Are you drinking enough water? Are you sleeping? You know, in other words, are you staying grounded in your body and in your life? Because again, shock is very debilitating. And I have advised all of you, please be very careful while driving or operating machinery or anything like that, just like it says on the bottles of medicine that have a sedative effect. My daily reading and study since we have learned about John Andrew and Young A's death has been focused on religious ideas about the capriciousness of life. And I've noticed something interesting that I haven't really, surprisingly enough, I haven't really identified before, which is that the Jewish and Christian scriptural tradition frame change as something that is always caused by God's providence and favor. If humans are good, this equation goes, and well-behaved, God will change their fortune for the better. And if bad things happen, it must be an expression of God's anger or displeasure. This is a very ancient kind of worldview, and you hear in the scriptures as the writers of those books are trying to make sense of things that happen and suddenness, because, well, you must have made God angry, or you must have favored God or praised God enough. So let's unpack what that does to that sense of life's unpredictability. First of all, it's a kind of a brace yourself approach to life. Whatever happens is either a reward or a punishment. So no wonder so much of the Hebrew Bible is a record of lamentation and complaint to God, like in the Psalms, which a lot of times can be summarized as, what I do to deserve this? Will you make it better? What if I do this, then will you make it better? If I praise you more, if I make more sacrifice, will you make it go away? Will you defeat my enemy? Will you fix this thing? I encourage you to spend some time in the near future, in the days to come, considering your own theological inheritance in the context of this question. Do you have a sense, explicit or maybe kind of unconscious, that the good things or the painful things that happen in your life are a result of something you did or something that you are? This is important to know, to explore. It's important psychologically, and it's important spiritually. Where is God for you in the slings and arrows of fortune? What do we deeply believe about good things happening to bad people, bad things happening to good people, and where we ourselves fall in that continuum? Because even if you have evolved your understanding from a punishment and reward sense of reality, this attitude runs very deeply in our Western mentality. So even if you've done some work on that theological inheritance, if you had it, it still is very much a cultural norm. So let's take another look at it. It might be lurking there, and we ask ourselves, why me? Because life is like that. The human body is mortal and in a state of constant flux. We are fragile, we're vulnerable, we are subject to change as much as the garden that flowers and then withers in its seasons, that shows forth flourishing plants that were never carefully tended, and some that do not thrive or die, even though planted in the perfect soil, fertilized, pruned, and fussed over. For me, God is always a compassionate companion, an energy, a source, for which I am grateful at happy times and which I feel embraces me and all of us in eternal compassion and care when the rug is pulled out from us. So that's my theology. The Buddhist perspective, which I've also been delving into lately on change, is very much of deep help to me. And the Buddhist perspective is that life is change. Therefore, one does not attach to one state of being because it's not going to last long. We observe it all. We remain awake and aware in the present moment. As we just heard Pema Chodron point out in the reading, impermanence isn't pain. It's just the nature of things. When we don't struggle against impermanence, she says later in the same section of the book, we actually reach harmony with reality itself. We cannot prevent pain, nor would we want to, for it is in grief and the stumbling around, disoriented, that we recognize that we are fully alive, that we care deeply about what and who is lost when change happens. But if we can abide within the pain and not white knuckle it, stiffen and resist it, we can grow deeper in wisdom, resilience, and ideally in compassion. Stay soft. Stay soft. Remember what my childhood choir director, Daniel Hersey, used to tell us kids when we were crowded onto the risers to give a concert in the auditorium. He'd say, if it gets hot and stuffy and you start to feel a little bit woozy, don't lock your knees. Keep your knees soft and you won't fall over. How often in the past days I have thought of these words, attributed to the Persian Sufi mystic Rumi. The way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation. Birds make great sky circles of their freedom. How do they learn it? They fall. And falling, they are given wings. We fall. We fly. And love holds us through it all.